My name is Miles Durant, and for 5 years, I've played the role of the agreeable son-in-law, nodding through Clarice's monologues and Gerald's sharp corrections at every family lunch like it was a ritual carved into stone. Isla would squeeze my hand under the table when things got too awkward, but even that, it started to fade. Her mother's voice always filled the room, brisk, pointed, relentlessly critical. And when it wasn't Clarice dominating the conversation, it was Gerald with his cutting one-liners disguised as fatherly wisdom. I told myself it didn't matter, that Isla loved me, that they'd warm up eventually. But the truth, their cold had seeped into everything. And Lucas, always Lucas, the ghost at every gathering. I never met the guy, but he might as well have been seated between us every Sunday. Lucas used to carve the turkey so neatly, Clarice would say, passing me the knife like she was expecting a disappointment. He was so good with Isla's niece. Remember that, Gerald? She'd nudge her husband, who'd nod like he was reminiscing about royalty. The worst part wasn't that they mentioned him. It was how Isla never pushed back, never said, "Miles is here now." She'd just sip her wine, tuck her hair behind her ear, and smile through it. That Sunday afternoon, something in the air shifted. Maybe it was the way Isla avoided eye contact as we pulled into her parents' circular driveway. The way her fingers danced nervously on the steering wheel. Maybe it was me. Maybe I was finally done trying to ignore the weight pressing on my chest every time we came here. The front yard was dressed like always, hedges trimmed into rigid boxes, flower beds too neat to be real. The house loomed like it was watching us. Isla forced a smile, unbuckled her seatbelt, and said, "Please, just don't start anything today." I didn't answer. I couldn't promise that anymore. Inside, Clarice greeted me like a manager greeting, and in turn, she didn't hire. A nod, a stiff hug, and a dismissive glance at my shoes, still wearing those brown loafers. "I see," she said with that familiar smirk. Gerald, reading a paper in his favorite chair, looked up long enough to say, "Miles, try not to spill anything this time." I bit my tongue. Ella was already walking ahead, weaving between the same furniture, the same sense of rosemary chicken and over-polished wood. The same feeling of being a stranger in a house I visited every month. In the dining room, the table was already set. Elegant silverware, ornate glasses, perfectly placed napkins, and 3 candles lit. Though it was barely afternoon, Clarice believed in ambiance. I believed in surviving the next 2 hours with what was left of my dignity. We took our seats, Isla beside me, Clarice at the head, Gerald across from us. The conversation began with mundane updates. Isla's promotion, Gerald's disdain for his new assistant, Clarice's Pilates instructor's divorce. I chimed in when I could, mostly to be interrupted. Actually, Clarice said at one point, "Lucas used to have such insightful things to say about career transitions. Sla, remember when he helped you prep for that JP Morgan interview?" Isla nodded. My jaw clenched. She didn't look at me. I laughed softly, not out of humor, just disbelief. Well, I guess I can't compete with the ghost of Lucas Penn. Clarice didn't even flinch. "No one's asking you to compete, Miles. We're just reminiscing." Reminiscing, that's what they called it. A slow erosion of presence. A reminder that I was never quite enough. Gerald lifted his glass to good men wherever they are, and that was it for me. The knot in my stomach pulled tighter, and I felt something flicker behind my eyes. A sadness, a sharpness I couldn't swallow anymore. I looked around that table, the white china, the polished silver, the people who never saw me. Not really. Isla was still smiling politely, chewing slowly like none of it fazed her. I wasn't angry. Not exactly. I was exhausted. 5 years of Sunday lunches, 5 years of being tolerated. I thought love would eventually smooth over the rough edges. I thought showing up, helping, listening, being steady would earn me a seat that felt like mine. But no matter how many dishes I helped wash or bottles of wine I brought, I was still the outsider, a placeholder, a name they couldn't quite remember when listing Isla's partners aloud. And the worst part? I had let it happen. I let myself be invisible just to keep the peace, just to be the easy husband. As we passed around dessert, cherry cobbler, which Lucas apparently used to bake from scratch, I realized I couldn't do this anymore. Not the pretending, not the silence, not the waiting for someone else to say, "That's enough." It had to be me. I placed my fork down gently. My voice didn't rise. I didn't make a scene. I just looked up and said, "I think I need some air." Clarice raised a brow, but said nothing. Ayla didn't move. Gerald adjusted his napkin and kept chewing. I stood, walked out onto the porch, and let the screen door swing shut behind me. The wind was cooler than I expected. It bit up my collar and made my eyes sting. But out there in the open, I could finally breathe. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't want to go back inside. I was pouring drinks when I heard the door creak open behind me, a sound too familiar for a house this tightly managed. The laughter in the dining room dimmed just slightly, the way a room pauses when something unexpected or unwelcome walks in. I turned mid-pour, the amber liquid sloshing gently in the crystal decanter. And there he was, Lucas, like a ghost draped in flesh and confidence, walking in without hesitation, like this house still belonged to him. Or worse, like he still belonged to it. His coat swung open as he crossed the threshold, arms wide. The picture of ease. "Clarice," he said warmly, "you look younger every time I see you." Clarice laughed. A real laugh, not the tight, controlled chuckle she reserved for my jokes. No, this was bright and delighted, full of welcome. She reached up, embraced him tightly, and kissed his cheek. A slow dread unfurled in my chest, creeping up my spine. Surely this wasn't happening. Not today. Not here. Then Aisla appeared. My wife. My wife who had told me nothing about this. No mention, no warning. And there she was, smiling, not just smiling, glowing. She moved toward him and hugged him like she was seeing an old friend she missed too much to admit. Then, God help me, she kissed his cheek too soft, casual, familiar. My hands were still wrapped around the dessert, the glass forgotten beneath it, as if my body didn't know what to do next. He said something. She laughed. Clarice touched his arm as she led him into the dining room like he was a guest of honor, not a memory we were supposed to have boxed up and buried under marital boundaries. I stood there unseen in the doorway, heart thudding in my ears like the first warning beats of an earthquake. Gerald rose from his seat to shake Luca's hand with a genuine smile. I hadn't seen him smile like that in months, maybe years. The kind of prideful approval I had begged for in subtle gestures and unspoken sacrifices. And there it was, given freely to someone else. Lucas clapped him on the shoulder and sat down at my table on the chair I helped pull out for Clarice earlier that day, at the place I helped prepare. Like nothing about this moment was off balance. No one looked toward the kitchen to acknowledge me. No one called out to say, "Miles, did you know Lucas was coming?" No one asked if I was okay. I walked slowly back to the table, each step heavier than the last, my seat still waiting. But now the energy of the room was off kilter, and I was the outlier. They were buzzing with excitement, old stories bouncing between them like sacred hymns. Lucas was already deep in conversation with Gerald about stock portfolios. Clarice was recounting the time he had helped organize a holiday charity drive. Isla was nodding along, smiling too much, smiling too softly. I sat careful, composed. My plate of food was already cooling. I forced a breath, slow and quiet, and picked up my fork. But I couldn't eat. My stomach was a knot of questions and something worse. Clarity. Lucas was charming. Of course he was. That was the danger of men like him. He didn't just enter a room. He absorbed it, dominated it. And in this family, that made him royalty. He reached for the wine I had poured my job every Sunday and served Clarice first. She beamed. He served excellent next. I wanted someone, anyone, to say, "This is uncomfortable," or "Miles, are you okay?" Or even just, "Sorry we didn't give you a heads up." But nothing came. Instead, Lucas looked at me just briefly, a single glance, and it said everything. He knew. He knew. That smile, that tiny tilt of the head, it wasn't innocent. It was territorial. And I suddenly realized this wasn't a visit. It was a declaration. I swallowed hard, pushed the food around on my plate, nodded along when someone said something about holiday plans. I smiled when prompted. I clapped when Lucas made a joke. I played my part, the obedient placeholder. Because that's what I was now, wasn't I? A filler, a stand-in. The man Islam married while waiting for a reason not to regret letting Lucas go. And now that he was back, it was as if her room tilted naturally toward him. I looked at her once. Just once. Her profile was perfect, serene, backlit by the chandelier. She wasn't looking at him, not in that moment. But she wasn't looking at me either. And that told me everything. So I sat there, not eating, not speaking, just watching, breathing, trying to figure out when the walls of my marriage had started crumbling and how I hadn't heard them fall. By the end of the meal, I didn't remember what anyone had eaten. I only remembered how it felt, like I had shown up to someone else's reunion, like I was the only one who didn't know this wasn't my seat anymore. After the second toast to Lucas' success, I couldn't take it anymore. My hand clenched around the base of my wine glass, not hard enough to break it, but close. I watched Lucas laugh with Gerald like old war buddies, Isla chuckling softly beside him, and Clarice leaning in as if he were the sun she wanted to orbit. I sat at that table, invisible, a placeholder surrounded by people who had already decided where their loyalty lay, and I'd had enough. I pushed back my chair and stood without a word, the legs of it scraping the tile floor loud enough to make Clarice flinch. Isla looked up, startled, maybe even annoyed. I didn't care. I touched her elbow gently. "Can I talk to you for a second?" She glanced at her mother, then at Lucas before sighing. "Sure," she muttered, rising slowly like I was inconveniencing her. We stepped into the hallway, the light dimmer here, the family photos glaring down at me like silent judges. She folded her arms, her expression guarded. "What is going on?" I asked, my voice steady but cold. "Why is he here? Why didn't you tell me?" Isla rolled her eyes and tilted her head. "Miles, it's not that deep. It's just Lucas. He's Clarice's guest." "Clarice's guest," I repeated, stunned. "You hugged him. You kissed his cheek. You sat beside him and toasted him like this is all perfectly normal." She let out a laugh that wasn't amused. "You're reading way too much into this." I took a step back, feeling like I've been slapped. "I'm your husband. I've shown up to every one of these damn lunches for 5 years. I've smiled through the jabs, the passive-aggressive comments, the constant praise for a man who hasn't been around in half a decade. And today, he walks in like a king. And you welcome him like you never left him. He's just an ex. She snapped. You're embarrassing yourself. Those 4 words stopped everything. You're embarrassing yourself. Not, I'm sorry. Not, you're right. Just dismissal. I looked at her for a long time, my jaw tightening, the lump in my throat growing heavier. The hallway felt colder suddenly. Or maybe it was just me unraveling. Do you even hear yourself? I whispered. You kissed him. In front of your husband. And I'm the one who's embarrassing. She looked away, chewing the inside of her cheek. I waited. I wanted her to say something, anything to walk it back, to realize how deep the wound went. But she didn't. She just crossed her arms tighter. I turned and looked toward the dining room. Clarice was watching from her seat with that smug, satisfied smirk she always wore when she got her way. Lucas had his wine glass halfway to his lips, eyes cast downward like he hadn't heard anything. But he had. I knew he had. And then I saw it. All of it. The choreography of control. The ease with which they had slipped him into place, as if I had simply been holding the spot warm. That table, that room, that family. They had never made room for me. They had just paused their story and resumed it the second he walked back in. I turned back to Isla. You don't even realize what you just showed me, I said quietly. She frowned. What does that mean? It means, I said, I'm not the husband at that table. I'm just the man you settled for until your mother's favorite came back. She blinked, stunned. That's not fair. No, I said, shaking my head. What's not fair is how long I tried to convince myself I mattered in that room. She opened her mouth, but I was already turning away. I didn't want to hear the excuses, the rationalizations, the too late acknowledgments. I walked back down the hallway and paused just before the dining room entrance. The sound of clinking silverware and half-muffled laughter hit me like static. I stood there for a moment, just breathing, trying to decide if I was about to make a scene or walk away quietly. Clarice raised her eyebrows when I reappeared. Everything all right? She asked, far too sweet. I said nothing. I didn't nod. I didn't smile. I walked to my chair, slid it in with care, and sat down. I folded my napkin slowly, placed it beside my plate, untouched. Then I stood again. Isla was just stepping back into the room when I said loud enough for everyone to hear. Thank you for showing me my place. Clarice's smirk faltered. Gerald looked up confused. Lucas's expression didn't change. He just watched silent in Isla. She froze. No one spoke, not even to stop me. I walked out with the weight of their silence pressing against my back. No one called after me. No one asked me to stay. The only sound was the steady click of my shoes on the tile floor. Footsteps of a man who'd finally seen the truth. That table had never been mine, but I'd finally found the courage to stop pretending it ever was. I returned to the dining room with a quiet resolve, the echoes of my own footsteps still ringing in the hallway. Every face turned toward me, clarity flickering in their eyes like a lamp suddenly switched on. Clarice's perfect posture wavered. Gerald straightened his back as if bracing for impact. Isla hesitated mid-step, her hand hovering above a wine glass. Lucas paused, fork midway to his mouth, eyebrows arched in professional curiosity. I stood at the edge of that ornate table, the centerpiece of roses and candles glowing innocently, and set my napkin on the polished wood. The crease was deliberate, exact, a silent punctuation. I pulled back my chair with deliberate strength, then let go. It slid forward, legs whispering against the floor, and I let the moment stretch until every pair of eyes traced the motion. My hands pressed lightly into the seat of the chair before I stood again. My plate, a carefully arranged collection of roast chicken and green beans, went untouched. I imagined it was already cold. I could taste the tension in the air instead. A sharp tang of unsaid apologies and shifting allegiances. The room felt smaller, as if my conviction had pulled the walls inward. I didn't speak immediately. Instead, I inhaled the scent of rosemary and faded cloth napkins. I counted the seconds, letting them crawl, ensuring everyone felt the weight of my stillness. I straightened my shoulders and looked directly at Clarice first. She wore the slightest tightening around her mouth. It wasn't anger. Her face was too practiced for that, but rather the realization that her authority had slipped, if only a fraction. Then I turned to Gerald. His eyes were searching as though he was trying to recognize the man who had suddenly reclaimed himself. Next, Isla. I saw fear flicker there. Fear that she had miscalculated the reach of her silence. And finally, Lucas, whose composed mask trembled for the first time. I saw my life reflected in their faces. The compromises I'd made, the words I'd swallowed. The dinners endured with a polite smile that masked a storm inside. I resisted the urge to remind them aloud of every sacrifice. The afternoon spent arranging floral centerpieces. The evenings volunteering at the charity drives, they praised Lucas for the countless times I'd held my tongue, while Clarice recounted holiday memories that starred him. Those victories belonged to him, their favorite son, their ideal. I had been their polite footnote. Taking a steady breath, I spoke calm but resolute. Thank you for showing me my place. My voice filled the room, gentle yet undeniable. The syllables hung between us, an unspoken allegation and a final farewell. I paused, letting it sink in. The murmur of silverware against glass ceased. Even the low hum of the chandelier felt muted. Isla's eyes glistened with unshed tears. She opened her mouth, then closed it, swallowed wordless regret. Clarice's lips pressed into a straight line. Her eyes flicked away. Gerald blinked, shifting in his seat as though uncertain which memory was real. Him correcting me or celebrating him. Lucas's jaw tightened, that easy charm stripped away, leaving only the hollow certainty that had guided him back here. I stepped back, released the chair, and felt the floor settle beneath me. I didn't wait for a protest, an apology, or a plea. There were none. I can see in their stillness that each of them chose silence over sentiment. They were comfortable with a routine that included Lucas's return, but excluded my presence. They had rehearsed every reaction, every embrace, but had never considered the possibility that I would reclaim my narrative. I turned to Isla, my wife for now, and gave her one last look. It was neither angry nor pleading, simply resolute. I saw so much in her expression: surprise, regret, confusion, perhaps even sorrow. But what I didn't see was regret powerful enough to change the evening's script. Her loyalty lay elsewhere with the family that continued to step around me to accommodate someone they valued more. I pushed the front door open. The cool air from outside rushed in, carrying the faint fragrance of lavender from the garden. It felt like a blessing, a fresh start, a boundary drawn in air. I paused there, one foot inside the night, one foot in the life I was leaving behind. The house fell silent, as though waiting for me to decide whether to retreat or to walk away for good. My heart hammered, but my mind was clear. It was time to leave the version of myself that tolerated being tolerated. I closed the door behind me with a firm click. The sound resonated down the empty hallway, audible proof that I had chosen this moment, my moment. I did not look back. I did not glance over my shoulder to see if anyone would follow. I knew they would not. There would be no chase, no frantic search, no last-minute plea. They had made their choice the moment they welcomed Lucas home and treated me like a guest passing through. Outside, the driveway glimmered under the soft glow of garden lamps. I stood there, the night air brushing against my face, stars peeking through a velvet sky. I drew in a long, liberating breath, filling my lungs with possibility. The tile behind me held memories of dinners, grudges, and unspoken resentments. Ahead lay the road I had taken once before, alone, uncertain, but finally free. I lifted my head, squared my shoulders, and took a step forward. Each stride carried me further from the man who once sat politely at that table, swallowing pride and hope in equal measure. Each step echoed a promise that I would never settle for a seat that wasn't meant for me. The night enveloped me, and with every passing moment, I felt lighter, stronger, alive in a way I hadn't realized was possible until I walked away. And behind me, the house remained, silent and still, its doors closed, its family unchanged. But I was changed. And as I disappeared into the darkness, I knew that I had left behind the version of myself that tolerated being tolerated and had embraced the man who demanded to be seen. I didn't go home. I slid out of the inn's creaky door just past dawn and slipped into the driver's seat of my car as if assuming a disguise. Miles Durant, the man who had learned where he didn't belong and needed to find where he did. The engine hummed beneath me, gentle and insistent, urging me onward. I pulled away from the curb without a destination, letting the tires carry me into a silent highway painted gold by the rising sun. The dash glowed with dawn's light, and I left the world behind in the rearview mirror. No radio, no calls, no music to distract me from the thoughts rattling through my mind, just the hum of the road and the steady beat of my own heart. For the first time in years, I had no schedule, no obligations, only the open road and my fractured resolve. As the miles slipped by under a ribbon of asphalt, the silence felt sharp against my eardrums, like a question lodged in my chest that refused to be ignored. I clenched the steering wheel at each gentle curve, surprised by the tremor in my hands. Each rotation of the wheels seemed to shed another layer of doubt that I belonged in that dining room. Doubt that I was enough for a family who never truly wanted me. Doubt that Isla saw me at all. With no radio to fill the space, my thoughts echoed in the cabin. I realized I had never allowed myself to feel this real unfiltered fear, mixed with a glimmer of something new. Relief. Relief at leaving behind the polite cruelty, the forced smiles, the endless reminders that I had been tolerated rather than embraced. I passed a billboard advertising a roadside diner, a stark red sign promising home-cooked meals. I resisted the urge to pull off, resisting the familiar urge to search for comfort in someone else's kitchen, in someone else's acceptance. Comfort had been an illusion at the Durant family table. So, I let the sign fade behind me, consumed by sunlight and distance. Instead, I focused on the horizon, where sky and earth blended into a pale promise of new beginnings. The radio remained off, and I felt the silence reshape me like cold water splashing against stone, carving something truer and harder in its path. Voices of the past, the taunts, the laughter, the piercing toast to Lucas, had no purchase here, replaced by the hum of tires and the pulse of my own determination. Thoughts drifted to my apartment, to the ring I had left behind on the dresser and the photograph face down on the coffee table. I imagined picking up that photo, flipping it over, and seeing my reflection. A stranger with shadows under his eyes, a man who had forgotten what it felt like to be respected. I thought of the empty frames scattered on our living room walls, now echoes of a story that had ended before it truly began. The image of me smiling in a sea of unfamiliar faces had grown too heavy to carry. But here, in the solitude of the highway, each mile washed away a fragment of that weight until all that remained was an empty canvas and a pen poised to write the next chapter of my life. A gentle breeze wafted through the cracked window, carrying the scent of pine and wild grass. I breathed it in deeply, as if inhaling permission to exist outside the terms others had set for me. My shoulders unclenched, and I felt the knot in my chest loosen. I slowed the car as I passed under a stand of towering oaks, sunlight filtering through leaves like confetti dancing in the breeze. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the warmth slide across my face. In that hush, I made a silent vow. I would not let myself be diminished again. I would seek out people who saw me, who heard me, who valued my presence rather than tolerated it. I would find a table where my voice carried weight, where my stories were honored and my laughter welcomed. Some hours later, the sun had climbed higher and warmed the dashboard until the cabin smelled of hot vinyl and possibility. I glanced at the sky through the windshield and realized I had crossed into towns I'd never visited. Places with names I could barely pronounce, each marking a fresh start, further removed from the life I had known. The empty road stretched before me in a ribbon of freedom, and I understood that this drive, with no destination, was more than an escape. It was a journey back to myself. I turned the wheel gently toward the rising sun, leaving behind the ghost of a husband who sat silently at a table that never felt like his own. Ahead lay uncharted roads and unspoken truths, and for the first time, I faced them willingly. The first night without her was quieter than I expected. I checked into a modest and just off the main road, the kind of place with floral quilts, uneven floorboards, and a handwritten welcome sign by the front desk. No grand gestures, no luxury, just a room, a key, and a door that closed behind me with a solid click. I stood in the middle of the room for a long time, not moving. The silence wasn't just around me, it was inside me, stretching out like a vast plain. No television hum, no Isla brushing her teeth, humming some tunes she never finished. No phone calls from her mother or reminders about brunch or dinner or errands, just me. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I needed to fill the quiet. I dropped my bag by the foot of the bed and sat down, the mattress creaking beneath my weight. There was a mirror across the room, mounted above a small desk. I caught a glimpse of myself in it. Rumpled shirt, tired eyes, the faint shadow of stubble I hadn't thought to shave. But something about the man staring back didn't look broken, just still. I rose and walked over to the mirror, standing in front of it with the lamp casting a pale ring of light behind me. I studied myself like a stranger, the slight arch of my eyebrows when I was trying not to feel too much, the tension in my jaw I hadn't even realized I was clenching, the way my shoulders had slumped over the years without me noticing. And yet beneath the fatigue, there was something else. Clarity. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. There was no cinematic unraveling, just a stillness I hadn't allowed myself in years. I placed both palms on the desk and leaned forward, staring into those eyes as if I could pull answers from them. What did I want? Not just from Isla, but from myself, from the man I was becoming. The moment I walked away from that family table, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I didn't have to look to know it was her. I walked to it, glanced at the screen. Isla. One missed call, then another, and another. By the time I sat back down on the bed, the missed call count had climbed to 4. I let it ring, not because I wanted to punish her, but because for the first time in 5 years, I needed to hear my own thoughts without hers blurring the edges. I thought about the way she had looked at Lucas. Not romantically, not even longingly, but familiarly, like something known and safe, something that didn't need to be questioned or defended. She'd never looked at me that way, not once in all our years together. I had always been her new chapter, but I was never the favorite passage. I was the man she married after things didn't work out the first time. I was the clean slate after the storm. I just hadn't realized she missed the thunder. My phone buzzed again. A voicemail this time, then another. I didn't listen to them. I didn't delete them either. I just sat in that room wrapped in the kind of quiet that felt like truth. The air was cold and I pulled the quilt over me, fully dressed, too worn out to change. My body ached, not from exertion, but from years of emotional tightrops I'd walked for people who barely noticed if I fell. I closed my eyes and expected the weight of it all to come crashing down. But it didn't. Instead, I felt something strange and unfamiliar settle over me. Peace. It wasn't dramatic or euphoric, just a soft, steady awareness that I didn't have to keep trying to prove myself to people who only ever saw me as convenient. The world didn't need my perfection. It needed my presence. And tonight, I had chosen myself finally fully. Sometime past midnight, I woke up thirsty and wandered to the bathroom. The light was too bright, reflecting off white tile in the mirror above the sink. I turned the faucet on and cupped cool water to my mouth, letting it soothe the dryness in my throat. I glanced up at the mirror again. Same face, same eyes, but something was different. There was resolve now, where there had only been compliance before. I stared at that reflection a moment longer and gave a small nod. Just one. A private agreement between me and the man I was finally learning to be. Back in bed, I lay there staring at the ceiling. My phone buzzed again. I turned it face down. I didn't want her words. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Because this night, this very first night, without Isla beside me, without the pull of obligation, without the soft armor of denial, I had something more valuable than answers. I had my own voice, my own silence, my own space. The window beside the bed cracked open just slightly, letting in the breath of wind from the trees outside. It rustled the curtain gently, like nature itself was affirming the choice I'd made. I closed my eyes and pulled the blanket up to my chest, listening to the quiet rhythm of the world outside, the creak of a tree branch, the distant call of a night bird, and nothing else. Just me, wrapped in stillness, breathing in the freedom of a life finally reclaimed. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But tonight, I didn't have to perform. I didn't have to beg. I didn't have to pretend. I just had to be. And that was enough. By the time sunlight crept through the cracks in the blinds, my phone had recorded 67 missed calls and a dozen voicemails. Each ring, each notification felt like a pulse demanding my attention, a heartbeat pulling at the edges of my resolve. I lay still between the plain white sheets of the inn's narrow bed, my mind both too exhausted and too alert to surrender to sleep. My finger hovered above the screen, poised to swipe away the alerts. Yet, I found myself unable to look. Not yet, because every buzz reminded me of her voice, pleading and insistent, and I wasn't ready to hear it. Hours earlier, I had let those calls stack up one after the other. "Miles, please call me back. We need to talk. Don't do anything rash. I can explain. I'm at your door. Each message was a lifeline thrown by someone who refused to understand that I was drowning in realizations she wouldn't acknowledge. I slipped out of bed, the weight of the messages heavy in my chest, and dressed in the same clothes I'd worn when I'd left. My shirt was stiff from yesterday's tension, my jeans worn from hours of driving, and my shoes carried the gravel dust from the lake dock. I felt like a ghost wearing the skin of a man I used to know. I sat at the small desk beneath the mirror and stared at the glowing screen. Islaw's name flashed at the top in bold letters, each one a reminder of confidence misplaced and trust betrayed. My thumb slammed down on the first voicemail. Her voice came through quietly, tremulous, urgent. "Miles, I'm sorry. Please just listen." Then the line went silent, leaving me with the echo of her apology and the hollow space where my reply should have been. I hit delete, watching her message vanish along with 50 others stacked below it. The air in the room felt too thick, saturated with regret and possibility. I closed the laptop and stood padding barefoot across the worn carpet to the window below. The parking lot was emptying as guests checked out. Suitcases rolled over asphalt, engines fired, doors clicked. Life outside this room moved forward. Inside, I had stood still, tethered by memories and a ring-eyed abandoned on a dresser, unready to sever the final thread. I left the voicemails unanswered. I left the messages unread. I left the door to the hallway cracked open, a thin line of pale light cutting across the dark floor like a promise. The creak of the hinges was soft, but even that small sound reminded me that I didn't have to stay. I had autonomy I'd never claimed before. Autonomy born of refusal to accept a version of myself that bent beneath others' expectations. I grabbed my jacket and stepped into the corridor, the INSIG walls, familiar yet foreign. My footsteps echoed as if I were the first guest to traverse these halls at dawn. The clerk's desk was deserted, a solitary lamp glowing in the corner. I collected my keys from the counter and offered a crisp bill to the ledger without hesitation. No glances, no questions. Just a nod and a pencil-elled signature. I passed through the lobby door into the cool morning air, letting it wash over me in long, purposeful breaths. Back in the car, I slid into the driver's seat and glanced at the dashboard clock. 7:14 a.m. My phone remained off, buried in my jacket pocket. I didn't need its tyranny. The road called to me again, a familiar highway stretching beneath an open sky. With a turn of the key and a hum of the engine, I moved forward, leaving the inn and its ghosts behind. The drive that day was different. The urgency of escape had given way to something quieter. Deliberation. I drove through small towns with shuttered storefronts and over bridges arching above slow rivers. At each red light, I studied my reflection in the rearview mirror. Eyes clearer now, the tension around my jaw softened by morning light. I allowed myself to imagine a new routine, one where I answered only to my own rhythm, not to text messages that started with, "You're overreacting," or "Don't let one lunch ruin everything." By late afternoon, hunger nudged me toward a roadside cafe. A faded sign promised soup and sandwiches, and I turned in without guilt. The waitress greeted me kindly, pouring coffee before I even sat down. I ordered a turkey club and watched the steam rise from my cup. For a moment, I relished the simplicity. No one here knew me. No one expected me to be someone else. I tucked into the sandwich slowly, letting each bite anchor me in the present. I listened to the low murmurs around me. Conversations about weather, weekend plans, the mundane beauty of ordinary lives. And I realized I craved that ordinariness, not the drama orchestrated by families and exes and unspoken hierarchies. After lunch, I wandered outside and found a bench beneath a maple tree. Leaves fluttered down, and I let one twirl to the ground before picking it up. Its veins were delicate, a reminder of how fragile assumptions could be. I thought of Isla's voice messages, some indignant, some pleading, some tender. She had reached out with love and manipulation tangled together, and I had to untangle my own heart. I folded the leaf into the palm of my hand and closed my fingers around it. I felt its fragility, its potential to crumble. I realized that if I held on too tightly to the past, I would crush whatever was alive inside me. So, I opened my hand. The leaf fell gently to the grass, its trajectory unpredictable. It landed softly, a small moment of surrender that felt weighted with meaning. I pulled out my phone and glanced at the screen. 67 missed calls from Isla. I thought of deleting them all at once, severing contact like I had cut ties with a family table that never felt like mine. But I paused, not because I was softening toward her, but because I recognized something essential. Closure wasn't about erasing history. It was about choosing which parts to carry forward. I tapped call back once, letting the phone ring twice before I answered. Hello? Her voice quivered, relief flooding the line. I drank it in for a moment, savoring the warmth, then exhaled slowly. I'm not coming back today, I said evenly. Silence followed, broken only by a distant car horn and the soft rustle of leaves. She asked, "Will you come back tomorrow?" I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I let the air between us settle like the space on a dinner plate before the next course. I need time, I said finally. Time to find out where I belong. She didn't respond. And that silence at last felt right, because for the first time, I chose my own rhythm. One that didn't depend on anyone else's applause or approval. The bench creaked under me as I stood and folded the leaf in my palm again, then let it fall once more. It didn't matter where it landed. What mattered was that I had opened my hand, released the past, and listened for the echo of my own heartbeat. And that echo carried me forward, one deliberate step at a time. Returning to our apartment felt like stepping into someone else's life, one I had outgrown without realizing it. The key door swung open to reveal the hollow hush of an empty home. The faint scent of lilies in the entryway, books stacked precariously on the coffee table, and the photographs hanging on the walls, all turned deliberately face down. I set my travel bag by the door and paused, listening to the quiet I had craved, but now found surprisingly heavy. Each piece of furniture, each framed memory, carried the weight of a life that had unraveled over a single lunch. I closed my eyes, inhaled slowly, and let it sink in. This space was no longer mine. I walked through the living room and paused before the dresser in our bedroom. There, in the soft glow of late afternoon, through the blinds, lay my wedding ring, once the emblem of promise, now a relic of a promise broken. I knelt and picked it up, turning it over between my fingers. The gold band caught the light, faintly reflecting the outlines of a future I had believed in. I slipped it off, feeling its weight leave me, and placed it on the dresser beside a single photograph of Isla and me. Smiling, eyes bright, oblivious to the fractures beneath the surface. I turned the photograph face down, severing its power to hold me. The moment felt sacred, like a ritual of release, and my chest expanded with the clarity I had been chasing. I opened my suitcase and began packing my essentials. A couple of shirts, jeans, my toiletry bag. Each folded item was a small declaration of independence, a step toward a life unburdened by memories I no longer wished to carry. I left behind the rest, the coffee mug she preferred, the throw pillow she insisted matched the couch, the side of the closet filled with her sweaters and scarves. Those belonged to a woman who had chosen silence over solidarity, who had refused to acknowledge the depth of my pain. I zipped the bag shut and stood, running a hand through my hair, noting the way my reflection in the mirror looked less burdened, more present. I stepped into the hallway, clutching my bag, and heard the key turn in the lock behind me. I hadn't expected her to return so soon. But then, that was Isla, always moving on her own teamet, always certain of how things should be. She entered, her face pale and eyes wide, like a deer caught in headlights. She stammered something, an apology, I assumed, but the words tangled before they reached my ears. I watched her clutch her purse strap, as though it would tether her to a world where she still had a place beside me. "Esla," I said softly, though the word felt foreign on my tongue. She froze. She opened her mouth, closed it again, then tried another approach. "Miles, please don't." I interrupted, but not out of anger. I wanted to spare us both the agony of hollow promises. I wanted her to understand, without my spelling it out, that the gap between us had grown too wide to bridge with words she refused to hear. Her shoulders sagged as if she had been waiting for this, as if she had always known. "I didn't know they were inviting him," she said, voice trembling. "They surprised me too." I exhaled, the air whooshing between us like a gust of truth. "You kissed him?" I said quietly in front of me, "and you didn't see it as a betrayal?" She hesitated, tears gathering in her eyes, but the words I needed to hear never came. "No, I'm sorry. No, I love you." No plea for forgiveness. Just that long, excruciating silence that said more than any apology could. I felt my heart settle. The decision final. The version of myself that endured silence, that begged for acknowledgement, was gone. I stepped back, adjusted the strap of my bag, and let the door click shut behind me. Her face blurred behind the glass as I walked away. Shoulders straight, each step resonating like the first notes of a new beginning. The elevator ride down was a slow descent into clarity. The lobby's pale lights felt welcoming, as though the world stood ready to receive me on my own terms. Outside, the neighborhood hummed with life. Children laughing as they chased each other on sidewalks. Neighbors chatting over hedges, cars gliding past. None of it belonged to the world I left behind. I walked to my car, parked across the street, unlocked the door, and slid into the driver's seat. The engine's hum was a warm greeting. I glanced at the rear-view mirror and caught a final glimpse of the building. The walls that had witnessed my compromises, the windows that had reflected my doubt. Then I shifted into drive. As I pulled away, I thought of the empty frames I left on the walls, the photograph face down on the dresser, and the ring that lay silent on its wooden perch. Those artifacts marked the end of a chapter, one filled with polite smiles and quiet endurance. Ahead lay a road unmarked by expectations, open to whatever I chose to write next. The afternoon light painted the street gold, and I drove forward. Each gear shift propelling me further, from the man who tolerated being tolerated, toward the life I had been brave enough to claim. And with every mile, I felt the exhilaration of uncharted horizons, the joy of a seat finally earned at a table of my own choosing. Weeks passed in a blur of half-finished days and restless nights. I rebuilt my mornings with coffee and solitude, my afternoons wandering city streets I'd never explored, and my evenings curled up with books I'd abandoned long ago. The sting of Isla's silence had softened into a steady ache, a reminder that I was learning to stand alone. Then one afternoon, an envelope arrived in crisp white paper sealed with blood-red wax. My name was scrolled in elegant script, Miles Durant. I turned it over expecting a bill or a misunderstanding. But when I broke the seal, the delicate stationery inside revealed its true purpose. An invitation to Isla's cousin's wedding printed in gold filigree. Saturday, September 12th, at the Swan River Estate reception to follow. My first reaction was to toss it aside. After everything, why would I attend? The same family that had treated me like a placeholder now asked me to witness another chapter of their story, one I'd always been excluded from. But then something stirred in me, a quiet defiance. I realized that accepting the invitation on my own terms would be a test of how far I'd come. The red wax seal matched the tie Isla once criticized as too bold. I smiled at the memory, that flash of color I'd thought catered to her taste. Now it was mine. I bought a new red tie that evening, one deeper in hue and woven with subtle silver threads. At home, I ironed a crisp white shirt, navy blazer, and charcoal trousers. I stood in front of the mirror, knotting the tie just under my collar, the fabric sliding through my fingers like a promise. I adjusted the length until it hung exactly mid-belt, its tip pointing to his small silver tie bar I added for weight. I smiled, not at the reflection of a man defined by others, but at a man reclaiming his own style. The bold color felt electric at my throat, a banner of newfound confidence that pulsed with possibility. On the morning of the wedding, I slipped the invitation into the inner pocket of my blazer and slid the ring I'd once placed on the dresser into my coat pouch. An old habit I wanted to acknowledge, not discards. I locked my apartment door behind me and greeted the day's pale light with a calm resolve. This time, I wasn't leaving to flee pain. I was showing up to stake my place in the world I chose. The Swan River Estate sat at the end of a tree-lined drive, its white columns and manicured gardens a picture of refinement. I parked at the far end of the lot and walked along the gravel path, the sway of my red tie catching glints of sun. I felt eyes on me, guests arriving in slacks and dresses, champagne flutes glinting in the morning haze. As I approached the reception tent, I spotted Elsa's family clustered near the entrance. Clarice wore pastel silk and pearls. Gerald sported a crisp tuxedo that matched the day's formality. Lucas stood beside them in a dark suit, but he wasn't the magnet of attention I remembered. Today, there was something different in the air. I carried my own energy, unbound by their expectations. Isla's eyes found me, widening as though she'd forgotten I existed. For a moment, time stuttered. She parted the cluster of family members and stepped forward. "Miles," she said, voice uneven. I nodded once, offering a modicum of courtesy. Then I turned to the table beside her, where a graphic designer named Delea sipped champagne and laughed at a guest's joke. She had come as my +1 when I called her days earlier asking if she'd accompany me, and she had said yes without hesitation. Dio wore a pale blue dress and carried a sketchbook tucked under her arm. Her eyes lit up when she saw me, not with pity, but genuine warmth. "This is Delea," I said, extending my hand. Her grip was firm, her smile easy. "Delea, this is Elislas. Well, you know, family." Delea didn't flinch. She shook hands with Clarice and Gerald, her presence unassuming yet resolute. "It's a pleasure to meet you," she told Clarice. Then she turned to Lucas with a polite nod. Lucas managed a stiff smile as though surprised to have someone unafraid of him. I felt a thrill of satisfaction. I hadn't invited Delea for company alone. I had invited her as a statement, someone who saw me, who respected me, someone whose laughter echoed mine, whose confidence never hinged on others' approval. As we stepped toward the registration table to sign the guest book, Isla's cousin, Vivian, embraced me. "I'm so glad you made it," she said, genuine gratitude in her tone. My chest tightened with warmth at her words. This cradle of family I'd longed for all those years. And here I was, claiming my space. Inside the tent, the reception unfolded with music floating through white draped ceilings and rows of chairs arranged beside a small stage. I found my seat at a reserved table labeled Miles Durant and Guest and settled Delia in the chair beside me. The table's centerpiece was a simple arrangement of wild flowers, fresh, unpretentious, perfectly suited to the unforced grace of the afternoon. Guests around us chatted about careers and travel, the clink of glasses punctuating conversations. When the best man began his toast, an affectionate, witty tribute to Vivian's childhood, he paused mid-speech as though recalibrating his audience. His gaze landed on me, and he nodded. "And I see we have a special guest," he continued. "Miles, who's traveled far, not just in miles, but in becoming the man standing here." Laughter and applause rippled across the tent, and I felt a flush of pride not born of vanity, but of recognition. Isla's eyes met mine across the table. She lifted her glass, offering a toast. I caught the glass and raised it in return. The red tie between us, catching the light like a beacon. For a heartbeat, our unspoken history flickered in her gaze. Regret mingled with admiration. And then I turned to Delia, who smiled and nodded, her eyes bright. I realized I didn't need Isla's approval. I was validating myself through my own choices and through the genuine connections I had forged. The sound of laughter, the richness of conversation, the warmth of acceptance, all of it felt earned, not given out of obligation. When the music swelled for the dance, I extended my hand to Dia. Her fingers slipped into mine, and we moved to the dance floor. The cool grass beneath our feet and the sunset gilding the perimeter made the moment perfect. I glanced over to see Isla standing by the tent's edge, watching with a conflicted expression. I caught her eye and offered a small nod of acknowledgement. Neither triumphant nor defensive, but simply present. Then I turned back to Delia and laughed as she leaned in to whisper something funny in my ear. And in that laughter, I felt the joy of belonging to a celebration I had chosen in a seat that was unquestionably mine. I walked into the reception tent just as the sun slipped behind the oak trees, casting long amber shadows over the white linen tables and scattering the laughter in soft light. Music floated through the warm evening air, a slow melodic waltz that beckoned couples to the dance floor. And I felt a thrill of possibility as I tightened Delia's hand and mine. The red tie at my throat still felt like a banner of selfhood, its color vibrant against the crisp white of my shirt. Tonight, nothing belonged to them. Not Lucas, not Clarice's delicate smile, not Isla's measured nods of recognition. Tonight, I belonged to me. Isla stood at the edge of the dance floor, arms crossed over her chest and gaze fixed on us. Her expression was a mixture of regret and longing, as though she had suddenly realized what I had always known, that the man she tried to confine within the safety of her family's approval had outgrown the confines they had built around him. But she remained silent, a spectator to my reclamation rather than a participant. I spared her one look, steady, compassionate, and without malice, then turned back to Delia, letting the gentle sway of the waltz carry me forward. Delia's laughter was warm in my ear as I guided her through the steps. Her eyes sparkled with that unguarded light I had first noticed in the bookstore, and I felt the weight that had settled on my heart lift completely. The music carried us in perfect harmony, each step a testament to the freedom I had fought for. Around us, couples moved with ease, but none shared the same exhilaration I felt. The thrilling sensation of finally standing on solid ground, unanchored from past humiliations. After the song ended, a smattering of applause encouraged us to the sidelines. We sipped champagne beneath the string lights, their soft glow illuminating faces full of genuine warmth. Friends of Das and my new acquaintances raised their glasses in quiet cheers, welcoming me into conversations about art, exhibitions, travel adventures, and dreams yet unrealized. Each word spoken by someone who had chosen me, not out of obligation, but because they wanted me there, felt like a brick laid in the foundation of a home I was building for myself. I spotted Gerald approaching, his tuxedo now slightly rumpled from hours of celebration. He stopped before me, his posture deferential rather than authoritative. "Miles," he began, voice hesitant. "I haven't said this before, but you look happy." His words were simple, yet they carried the weight of his own astonishment. The father, who once dismissed me, now acknowledging my presence with genuine admiration. I nodded, letting the moment settle between us like the final chord of a symphony. "Thank you," I said. "That means more than you know." Clarice appeared at his side, her pearls shimmering in the lantern light. She offered a tentative smile, one that reached her eyes for the first time instead of just her lips. "You carried that red tie." "Well," she remarked softly. The compliment felt like an olive branch. Late, but sincere. I inclined my head in gratitude. "It's mine now," I replied, "and I'll carry it wherever I go." She glanced at Delea, then back at me, and I saw a flicker of understanding. That identity wasn't defined by approval, but by the courage to choose yourself. Isla approached next, her steps deliberate. Her heels clicked softly on the wooden platform, a rhythm that echoed in my chest. When she reached me, she inhaled sharply, as if summoning the words she couldn't quite find. "Miles," she said, voice trembling. "I'm proud of you." Pride, a word I hadn't expected to hear from her. Yet it resonated with truth. I looked into her eyes, seeing both apology and a quiet hope that we could reconnect on new terms. But I sensed that our paths had diverged. Hers and mine now carried different melodies. "I'm proud of myself too," I answered gently. "Thank you for saying that." I offered her a small smile that carried neither accusation nor regret, only acceptance of what had been and openness to what might come. She nodded as if releasing a final piece of our shared history, then stepped back into the soft glow of the lanterns, joining the swirl of guests lost in conversation and celebration. Delea slipped her arm through mine and guided me toward a quieter corner of the terrace, where the stars peeked through the lattice of leaves overhead. The night air carried the scent of jasmine and distant lilacs, and the hum of celebration softened into the contented murmur of gathered friends. I paused, taking in the panorama, my own reflection in the water of the swan pond, the gentle sway of white lanterns, the silhouettes of lovers dancing. This moment, this space, was entirely mine. Delea leaned into me and rested her head on my shoulder. "You look different," she whispered. "You're more alive." Her words felt like daylight, breaking after years of twilight. I closed my eyes and drew in a slow breath, feeling the steady thrum of my heartbeat. "I feel alive," I replied, voice steady. "For the first time in a long time, I know where I belong." We stood there, wrapped in each other's warmth, listening to the distant strains of the final song. As the melody rose, I slipped my hand into my pocket and pulled out the ring I had once placed on the dresser, now a reliquary of lessons learned. I held it between my thumb and forefinger until the last notes faded, then dropped it into the pond's still water. It sank slowly, sending ripples across the mirrored surface. When the ripples stilled, only stars remained, a constellation of new beginnings. The music swelled again, a lively tune inviting one last dance. I offered my hand to Dia, and we stepped onto the floor beneath the trees, string lights weaving constellations around us. Guests cheered softly as we moved in time to the beat. No longer a performance for approval, but a celebration of choice. I caught sight of Isla watching from the edge, her expression unreadable yet touched by something unspoken. I nodded toward her once more, an acknowledgement of our shared past and a promise that I was no longer bound by it. The dance ended in a flourish of laughter and applause. Delia and I stepped away, hands entwined, and I felt the world settle into place around me. The seat I had longed for at the family table had lost its allure the moment I realized I could build my own. Now, surrounded by people who saw me, who chose me, who celebrated with me, I understood that belonging wasn't about earning a place in someone else's narrative. It was about writing your own. As the reception drew to a close, Delia and I walked back toward the car. The night sky, a tapestry of infinite possibility. I paused at the edge of the driveway, looking back at the Swan River estate. The house that had once represented exclusion now stood as the backdrop to my liberation. I turned to Delia, kissed her gently, and whispered, "Thank you for being my seat at the table." She smiled, her eyes bright with shared joy, and slipped her hand into mine as we crossed the gravel path. Together we moved forward into the night, into tomorrow, into the life I had finally chosen for myself.